Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today we're working on a 1988 Jeep YJ, also known as a Wrangler. The fuel gauge on this is pegged at maximum no matter what the fuel level is. So let's get into it. This Jeep has gone about 60 miles since I last filled the tank, but if we turn it on and watch the gas gauge, you can see it goes well past 3/4, which is probably about where it should be. And right now it looks like it's sitting at about full, but it'll continue to rise even past that full mark as we just sit here. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves, what would cause this to occur? If the float in the tank sank, it would go all the way to empty and stay at empty. So it's unlikely to be the case. If we take a look at the factory service manual, this is our resistance for the fuel gauge. It says when it's empty, we should have 1 ohm of resistance. When it's full, we should have 89. So the more fuel that's in it, the higher the resistance. That means if that wire is disconnected, so infinite resistance, it's going to read full or above full. So likely what's going on is we have a broken wire somewhere between here and that tank sending unit. I want to replace the bulbs back behind this panel anyway because it's really dim. It's got old incandescents in it and some of them are burnt out. So I'm going to take this off just to do that. But while we're in there, we can test out and check for broken wires. First thing we have to do is remove this bezel. It's got 3 screws here and then 3 down here that need to come out. To remove the cluster, we have 6 screws. There are 4 down here, 1 on this side, and 1 on this side. The cluster lamps, they can usually be reached from back underneath. Not as easy to get to as this, but let's take one of these, turn it a quarter turn, and there's the lamp. It's also blue. That explains why they're really dim and crappy. I'm going to replace them with some of these LEDs. If it's not obvious, 194 style bulbs, they just pull straight out. And so the new one just pushes right back in. The connector on this, you just squeeze here and it pulls out. You can see the circuit board for this is just some copper effectively printed on plastic, so nothing but the finest 1980s technology. I'll get this all cleaned up and then we'll be right back. Once you have things cleaned up a bit, inspect this circuit board fairly carefully, looking for any cracks, because if we have a crack across it, that's going to be effectively a broken wire. The fuel gauge is right here, so we want to pay particular attention in this area, but I'd inspect the whole thing while you have it out. I don't see anything obviously wrong here, so we're going to set it aside and take a look from here all the way back to the tank. Diagnosing electrical problems like this is sometimes a bit challenging, and the factory service manual isn't always that helpful. Depends on the year of the vehicle, who made it, maybe even the model. The factory service manual might or might not have good wiring diagrams. In this case, for the YJ, it really does not have very good diagrams. Jeep actually produced this separately. That is a really nice book. It has full wiring diagrams of all the systems in it. It's kind of hard to get it in front of the camera inside the cab here, but in this case, here's our fuel gauge, and you can see the connector here. It says C138. So we've got these, but also it has these great troubleshooting sections. So for the fuel gauge, we've got a couple of tests that we can run. The first test is to measure the voltage at C138, and we should have about 7.5 volts. If it fails, we need to repair that printed circuit or the gauge itself. And then we want to measure the resistance from C138 to a clean ground. And if it's got 0 ohms, then it's good. Otherwise, we have to repair the open between 138 and G301. That's probably the connector at the fuel tank or at the sender. Now in this case, I think the manual is wrong. It says it should be 0, but that's not true. It should be in that range that we had from, what was it, something like 1 ohm for empty to 89 ohms for full. So we should actually get a value here when we measure this that corresponds to the current fuel level. And I think that's why it says if it's 0, replace the sender. Because if we have no resistance at all, the sending unit is bad. Or if we have infinite resistance, then the wire itself is bad. Also important to note, they always tell you whether the ignition switch should be on or off. So this one is with the switch to the run position. So really the next question is, which one of these pins do we check? One of them goes to the gas gauge, but it's not obvious looking at it. There are a couple of ways to do this. First, we can look at this, and it says, see there's a 4, so it's on pin 4. It also says it is a tan wire, right? So if we're going by the pin number, let's say the wires have been changed or you can't tell. Also in here, there is a diagram of the gauge package. Pin 4 is right here. So 1, 2, third one. You've got the clips. So if I hold it like this, it's going to be the third one in. So 1, 2, 3. The other way to look at it is we just look for the tan wire, as it said. And if we hold it like this and go 1, 2, 3, you can see that is the tan wire. So this third one over is the one we want to check. If you look really close on the injection molded plastic here, it actually has them numbered as well. So what we need is we're going to use a meter. Nicely, this one's about the same vintage as this vehicle. So the first thing we're going to do is set it to voltage. We know we're under 20 volts. It should be about 7.5. So we're going to measure the voltage with the key and run at this tan one. Now what we can do is we need to go from tan to ground to check voltage. The black here, I already looked at the diagram. It is the ground, so we should be able to just test the voltage between 3 and 4. Now the downside of using this ground is, what if that ground is bad? Well, you can check it for continuity from here to some other chassis ground. Since the other gauges in this are working, I'm pretty confident that works. The corollary there is, if none of your gauges work, it's quite possibly that that ground is broken. I'll turn the key on and we'll check the voltage between 3 and 4. We'll see if I can do that and still have all of this on camera. As you can see, you want to be careful where you're probing, because I shorted to ground there, and there's my instrument panel fuse. That's what a good one looks like. So, have to replace this one with this, then we can go back and probe again. So if we want to check the resistance all the way back through that sender, we want to check from number 3 to ground, or number 4 here. So I turn this to 200 ohms because it should be less. And it says I have about 60 ohms of resistance. If you recall from looking at it, it should be somewhere between 1 and I think 89 or 90, something like that. So that feels like that's about 3/4 of the way. So that's actually right. So my gut instinct was that the wire from here to the back was bad, but it's not. That seems to be good all the way back to the sender. Now that we know that the resistance is good, we want to check the voltage going to it. Number 4 is our gauge, and you can see it's got this little trace that comes over here. So what we want to do is we want to test that, but we have to test it while the connector is connected. So we're going to plug it in. We're going to probe right there on this tan wire, number 4, and see what kind of voltage we have. Now I'm going to turn the key on. You can see we've got about 2.6 volts, and the book said we should have about 7. So that tells me that either this printed circuit thing here or the gauge itself is bad. I think what I'm going to do is take this thing back out, and I'm going to disconnect this gauge connector and make sure those connections are clean. Check the contacts underneath here. I need to take this off. It's really difficult to do because the gauge kind of has to move forward. So take the face off, which is just this piece. It's actually real simple. You can do it with your fingers. These tabs just kind of have little, teeth on them, and they go through into these notches. So just walk around, push them in, and then push it out. Once you've done that, you loosen this. It's 9:30 seconds. And then this connector has 2 pins on it. It comes straight up. So it's got these. What we're checking is the contact here and here, and then on these. I'm going to clean these with alcohol. They don't look bad to me, so it's feeling like it's actually a bad gauge. At this point, if you're replacing the gauge, that just comes out and you can get a new one. And you can see where that blue is right there. Those pins go into that, and that's what aligns it straight up and down. Be careful when you have this out. These needles are really fragile, so just be aware of that. Well, I was looking for isopropyl, but I couldn't find any. But I have plenty of this. It'll work. So your contacts, clean those. Might as well clean these while we're at it. Then clean these. I don't see anything obviously wrong. I suspect that the fuel gauge itself is bad, but since I have to order one, I need to put everything back together while I wait for it. So we might as well clean everything up on the chance that just maybe we'll get lucky and it'll work. And we'll reconnect it and see if we're lucky. And let's turn the key on. Well, that's going up slow. Well, look at that. I'm not sure what it was that we did that fixed it. Maybe just cleaning it. But that looks about right. So now just reassemble. And now before I put the bezel on, let's test it again. Looks pretty good. Seems to be right. Clock is still running. Oil pressure is good. Voltage looks good, so all the other gauges still seem to be working. So we're good to go. That's all there is to it. Thanks for watching.